Haha, so many mobs. Time to Starfall and blast these bitches. Oh, you're fucked now. Okay, so Starfall hits the big pack of mobs like a gentle rain in a summer evening. A warm summer evening. But there are other parts of Boomkin that kick ass, and you'll get that plus talents, gear, essences, rotation, and a lot more in today's Balanced Druid Guide for 8.3, so stay tuned. The guide will focus on the fundamentals to get you started really quick at playing balance properly and to make sure all the info is spiff and juicy. Bora from the balance community helped us by feedbacking the information so you know your ass is getting quality shit. On the first row, you got to take Nature's Balance as the best DPS output on the row. There's nothing complex here. You just passively generate astral power while in combat, and outside of combat that will cap at 50, meaning you will start any major fight with 50 astral power. Fairly straightforward. In dungeons you want to take Force of Nature always. The trends will taunt everything around them for a decent amount of time. This helps your tanks breathe on big packs, lets them drop necrotic, or even helps them kite. The uses for this are quite a few, and it plays into your very strong and useful niche as a Swiss Army knife in all Mythic Plus content. Get used to it, since that's what separates good balanced druids from ferals. On the second row, take Wild Charge by default. The mobility is great and makes your versatile class even more versatile. As a caster, you always want to reduce the amount of time you are not casting, and getting from A to B fast will help you do that. The alternative is Renewal if you know you won't need to move much and you will be taking high amounts of damage. There is a niche for Renewal, but overall Wild Charge will provide you with more utility and even survivability. Third row is a very iconic Druid row that you essentially have on all of the specs. Resto Affinity will be your choice here, however. As a Boomkin, you are already one of the tankiest DPSers in the game, and piling the passive healing on top of that will provide you with the most overall sustain for the damage you are taking. Guardian Affinity is something that on paper sounds nice, but the passive damage reduction is outclassed by the passive healing from Ysera's gift. Not to mention, with Resto you are getting actual heals to use in emergency, which, for me at least, saved my tank in almost every dungeon at least once. There is a niche way to use Guardian Affinity, but we will keep that for another time. Or you can visit the Dream Grove Discord channel for more advanced tips about what you can do after you finished watching this video. Please watch it until the end. Next up, we have an actual utility row. Each option is perfectly viable, although the number of uses or situations in which they are so will vary. Typhoon will be your most used option here. Displacing mobs by knocking them back has multiple uses in ad fights and dungeons. You need a good reason for doing this, of course, so keep that in mind. Mass Entanglement is used to keep ads and trash rooted, either for them to despawn or not to do their mechanics on your group, or to give you and your party time to accomplish a kite, get back cooldowns, heal up, whatever you need. Bash is a long duration single target stun which will see the least uses, since you will most likely be playing with classes that have far better stuns than you, and losing Typhoon over it is very not worth it. No, not very often. Not worth it, no words. The fifth row brings you back to some damage improvements. Starlord will be your default choice, at least at the start of the season. It provides you with passive haste, improving your rotation by keeping your casts short. It also helps fitting in more spells in a tight, high-intensity window. It's also the easiest to use, since you don't really manage it in any way, or at least shouldn't, since trying to maximize it will gain you very little DPS gain at the cost of a higher risk of you messing up, capping on resources, and losing you a much larger DPS chunk. The alternative is Incarnation. This is a very strong cooldown that replaces Celestial Alignment and lasts for 30 seconds with a 3-minute cooldown, reduced by an essence which we will discuss in a bit. This can be very useful in situations where you need to do high amounts of damage for those 30 seconds, and you also have downtime where the spell can naturally come off cooldown, making its downside not as detrimental. The 6th row also comes with 2 options. For single target and cleave fights in general, take Stellar Flare. This provides you with another dot to keep on your target that deals decent damage, but more importantly, generates astral power as well. So keeping it on more than 1 or 2 targets can be inefficient since you will end up capping on astral power eventually. In that case, you take Twin Moons, which would be your option for fights with multiple targets and, of course, all Mythic Plus scenarios. This will significantly reduce the globals you need to spend on Moonfires on top of increasing its damage by 10%. And finally, we reach the last row. Currently, the best performing option in all situations is Shooting Stars. This makes your Moonfire and Sunfire ticks call down a shooting star to deal damage and generate arcane power. The proc rate has diminishing returns when fighting multiple targets, but still does well enough in AoE. Fury of Elune is a very niche alternative if you need massive burst damage for very specific encounters. Outside of this, you'll have less overall damage by taking it, so it's a bit more utility focused in this sense. What works in all situations is you clicking that bell notification thingy to get all of our videos in your newsfeed. Thank you, let's move on. Balance has a few stats at the top that perform very well for you. Ideally, if you are looking to optimize your damage output to the max, you will have to sim your stats on websites such as raidbots.com. As a general priority that you can follow, keep haste at the top, followed by critical strike, versatility, and mastery with intellect at the bottom. This is usually the ideal for single target fights, but mastery might climb above critical strike once you add more and more targets. This is of course more min-maxy, and if you're willing to juggle the stats to this extent, I would recommend you still sim since it's faster. You'll probably increase your damage by a few percentages at the very most, so it's not going to make a huge difference as long as you stick to the stat priority above. As such, when you get your consumables, aim at keeping them haste related. A Cord of Haste and Quicksand Spinels will be your most used ones, adding that sweet haste you want so much. For your weapon, go with Torrent of Elements, or you can sim a few options to check the best and see that they are actually very close to each other. I checked the ones that were doing the best for me, and the difference between the best weapon enchant and the worst weapon enchant was of 0.3% damage difference. I mean, really? The flask will clearly be the greater flask of Endless Fathoms, while the potions can vary depending on how many targets you are fighting. Usually for bosses and single target, you can get Focus Resolve. Scaling up to 4 targets, you can take Unbridled Fury, and even more so, Empowered Proximity will do the best in large AoE scenarios if you can also stay close to the pack, which is not something we recommend until you get used to the spec and know the encounters and what they can do in closer range. For the food, eat the baked potatoes, for haste mainly. Feast will not be as amazing, especially as you scale in gear, since intellect scales poorer than the secondary stats, even at an increased amount that the feasts provide. Balanced druids have a pretty specific requirement when it comes to the azerite traits. Shrieking Stars will be stacked 3 times in conjunction with one Arcanic Pulsar. These work one with another since Arcanic Pulsar procs Celestial Alignment and Shrieking Stars works only during that time. This is also why Haste works so well, since Haste means more Celestial Windows over the course of a big fight. Once you have these 4 traits, you can essentially opt to go for generic stat traits, since the other balance related options are fairly underwhelming. So stuff like Swirling Sands will do very good for you. The same logic applies to the inner rings. Unstable Flames, Overwhelming Powers, and such will be your best options. Moving on to the essences, Vision of Perfection will be your major for all scenarios, especially after you got your Shrieking Stars and Arcanic Pulsar, also reducing the cooldown of Celestial Alignment and Incarnation as mentioned before. On top of the celestial procs from Arcanic Pulsar, you get procs from the Vision as well, giving you higher uptime on the DPS cooldown and giving more value to the Streaking Stars azerite trait. The synergy is really nice, and it's one of the main reasons that Boomkin is doing so well right now and also in the previous patch. An alternative major specifically for Mythic Plus will be focusing Iris. This adds a massive AoE burst component to your kit and usually works in lower keys where the pools are short and mobs die in way under a minute. Vision of Perfection has a proc rate of almost 1 per minute, meaning it will have most value in fights that are a little over a minute, from a numbers point of view. Conflict and Strife will be one of your overall best miners, with Breath of the Dying being under a heavy spotlight at the moment as well. Focusing Iris can still do a really good job, or you can replace it with Unbound Force if you need to target swap often, World Vein Resonance if enough people in your group are running it, or Purification Protocol for simple yet effective AoE damage output. As far as trinkets are concerned, the new raid is fairly generous in the options it provides you with. Different options perform differently in these situations, of course, where raiding will favor Psyche Shredder and Manifesto of Madness as two good examples of currently the best simming options, while AoE scenarios will instead look at the Titan Shard Trinket set from Raw Den, as long as they are completing the set, of course. Had to say it twice to underline how important that is. Generally, the trinkets can be either passive stat procs, which work in prolonged fights, or on-use effects that can be combined with celestial alignment to address a sensitive boss phase or a dungeon pack that needs to be bursted down quick. Other than that, you can either wear your highest eye level or check bloodmallet.com that currently has a ranking list of the trinkets performance for the raid. Right now, there's only one weapon that stands out in terms of predetermined corruption effect, and that is Vorzjokal. That is how you pronounce it if you're a true loyalist. Void Ritual is a fairly basic effect, and chances are you already have one instance of it simply for doing the 8.3 intro. In the lack of a better corruption drop, it can work, but most likely you will cleanse it if it pops on this weapon. The effect is good, don't get me wrong, but not very competitive. One little mention is that as of recording this video, Blizzard announced that Void Ritual will be buffed and will most likely be by the time the video is out. Since we don't know by how much and how corruption effects will be balanced overall over the course of the patch, you will still need to sim or keep your eyes again on websites such as bloodmallet.com. And speaking of corruption effects, with the risk of these being nerfed and buffed, right now there are a few that stand out that you would want to prioritize equipping. The top contenders are Infinite Stars for single target, Echoing Void for multi-target, and Twilight Devastation for both, performing on average better than its respective counterparts. As with Void Ritual, Echoing Void is seeing upcoming changes, as in nerfs, and depending on where Blizzard wants to take the corruption system, we might see it occur to the other two effects as well. The other side of the coin is how much corruption you can actually equip. The amount is up to you in how much you can manage it personally. So here come into play stat proc corruptions, which are cheap in terms of how much they add to your total negative value. Stat procs and stat boosts are still good, especially now when your cloak cannot add enough resistance to warrant one or more of the big boy effects we mentioned earlier. Your damage output is 0 if you are dead, and stacking corruption past, say, 59, which is the highest I can recommend in good conscience, will probably kill you, or often make your healer's life a living hell. When opening on a boss, stay at max range and cast Solar Wrath 2 to 3 seconds before the pull. Cast a quick Star Surge, apply Moonfire, Sunfire, and Stellar Flare. Then pop Celestial Alignment and move on to the normal rotation. The idea behind this opener takes advantage of the slow travel time of Solar Wraths to get a second cast out before the first one hits the boss and you end up pulling before your tank. Don't do that, please. Your haste will come into play here. The more haste you have, the closer to the pool you will start these two casts. And seeing as you start with Nature's Balance and as such 50 Astral Power, You want to use your first Star Surge before dotting and popping your cooldowns to prevent capping on your resource, and without natural balance, you just don't use Star Surge there. As you get accustomed to the spec, the general rotation is fairly simple and a bit different than other specs. You just want to make sure you are not dropping your dots and capping on your resources. So, maintain Moonfire, Sunfire, and Stellar Flare respectively in single target. Star Surge to prevent Astral Power capping is the next most important thing to do. After that, consume your empowerments by casting Lunar Strike and Solar Wrath respectively. Keep in mind that by casting either one, you have a chance to grant yourself the other empowerment as well, so you need to adapt to that on the fly. Otherwise, fill in with Solar Wraths to generate Astral Power. The same priority is maintained in AoE by applying your dots, 2 this time ideally, to all the targets possible. Starfall is the controversial bit. Considering you already have the azerite traits we recommended, you only want to Starfall on more than 7 targets since you get more damage by consuming your Astral Power on Star Surges instead, and everything that this will imply. If you don't have Arcanic Pulsar and Streaking Stars, you can start by casting Starfall from 3 targets and up. But really, if you have the time to cast Starfall, farm the traits. We want to throw again another special thank you to Bora, who helped feedback the guide and provide us with insight about Boomy from a higher experienced player's perspective. And yes, there's more to the spec than we can add in our video, which we want to keep a little bit on the shorter side to get you fast and ready and good to go for dungeons and raids. And if you want to check those advanced tips and details, join the Dream Grove community Discord, where a lot of the top boomies are today, and you'll find even more resources such as Bora's very own Icy Veins guide. Yep, he is the author of the Icy Veins guide, which we use to fill in a couple of blanks here and there where we were not very sure about, you know, certain things. So thank you very much, Bora, and thank you very much the Dream Grove Discord channel for providing us with a lot of information for balance. You guys rock. And of course, Patreons rock oh so much. God damn it, guys. Thank you so much for the support and the fact that you believe in us and in our content. We will not disappoint you. And if you're interested in supporting our channel a bit more, check the details down below. There are a couple of links that you might find interesting. Thank you for watching the video, and see you in the next one.
Never thought I'd meet someone